sides to every coin. There's a heads and there's a tail. There's three sides to every story. There is my side, and then there's their side, and then there's the truth. At least that's what we believe. We're told in order to look at a situation objectively, list the pros and cons before coming to a conclusion. But yet, everywhere we look, whether we're tuning into a media outlet or social media, whether we're listening to a conversation or having a conversation with a family, friend, or coworker, if you listen closely, there's one thing that they all have in common. There's one thing that these conversations have in common, and that's they're one sided. But yet, we get mad, we get frustrated with the different media outlets. We get mad, we get frustrated with our friends and family. They're telling us, or when we feel they're telling us one side of the story for the purposes of controlling the narrative. We're slowly morphing into a one sided society. And you have to ask yourself, am I also contributing to this one sided society? And see, this is what I mean by that. We want to talk about separation of church and state, but ignore the times we run to the church looking for help. We want to talk blessings, but ignore curses. We want to talk religion, but ignore a relationship with God. We want to talk church, but ignore worshiping God in truth and in spirit. We want to gossip, but ignore prayer. We want to talk culture, but ignore kingdom. We want to fit in with the world, but ignore consecration. We want to talk worldly, but ignore holiness. We want to talk heaven, but ignore hell. We want to talk rights, but ignore gratitude. We want to talk about ourselves, but ignore Jesus. We want to talk about victimhood, but ignore the power to overcome. We want to talk an eye for an eye, but ignore forgiveness. We want to talk ownership, but ignore stewardship. We want to talk promiscuity, but ignore abstinence. We want to talk about free will, but ignore accountability. We want to talk about STDs, but ignore sexually transmitted demons. We want to talk marriage, but ignore covenants. We want to talk about church hurt, but ignore world trauma. We want to talk about my truth, but ignore the truth. We want to talk about the problem, but ignore the solution. We want to talk about freedom, but ignore witchcraft. We want to talk riches and wealth, but ignore the process. We want to talk education, but ignore wisdom. We want to talk me, myself, and I, but ignore God's will. We want to talk aliens and ghosts, but ignore demons. We want to talk about good, but ignore evil. We want to talk about fear, but ignore faith. We want to talk about darkness, but ignore the light. We want to talk about idolizing man, but ignore worshiping false gods. We want to talk about antiques, but ignore our elders. We want to talk about abortion, but ignore the Ten Commandments. We want to take a knee for our country, but ignore bending the knee for Jesus. We want to honor man in high places and positions, but ignore the Lord of the Lord and the King of Kings. We quote scriptures, but ignore putting them into practice. Then we look around the world and wonder how we got here. The question is, are we going to continue contributing to this one sided society for the purposes of controlling the narrative, depending if we want that narrative to make us feel better? If we want that narrative to make us feel good, are we going to continue to contributing to this one-sided society? Or are we going to pivot I want to thank you for tuning in to this Glory Soapbox, where truth finds its voice. I'll see you on the next one.